You know how sometimes the market just whips around and you think, what in the world just happened?
Definitely.
Ever get that feeling someone out there knew something you didn't and maybe even profited from it?
It's a thought that crosses your mind, for sure. And well, that's kind of the scenario we're digging into today.
Yeah, we're looking at a really specific sequence of events, market swings, tariffs changing.
And it's raised some, let's say, serious questions, specifically about potential insider trading, possibly involving former President Trump.
Okay, so let's paint the picture. First, Trump imposes tariffs.
Right. Standard policy move at the time.
And almost right away, the market reacts. It drops.
As you might expect, yeah. Uncertainty often does that.
Then just a few hours later, he posts something on Truth Social.
What did it say?
This is a great time to buy. Pretty direct.
Okay. And then what happened?
Then, fast forward just a little bit more, and boom, he announces a pause on those very same tariffs.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's quick.
And you can guess what happened next, right? The market soared. Jumped right back up.
So tariff on, market down. Buy now message. Tariff paused, market up.
Exactly. That rapid sequence, especially, coming right after that suggestion to buy stocks.
It understandably set off alarm bells for a lot of people.
Yeah. Was it just like a weird coincidence?
Or could there have been something more deliberate going on? That's the core question.
And it gets even more intriguing. Trump apparently shared a video on Truth Social.
Oh.
And the source material suggests it kind of hinted he might have intentionally tanked the market.
Intentionally? Wow. Okay, that adds another layer.
It really does. When you see stuff like that, it's hard not to wonder, what's really going on behind the scenes.
For sure.
So for everyone listening, our mission today is basically to unpack this timeline, look at the different reactions.
And really try to get to the heart of these insider trading allegations. Let's dissect it.
Okay, where should we start? Maybe with the official reactions. Adam Schiff comes to mind.
Right. Representative Schiff, he sent a formal letter, didn't he, to the White House?
He did. And his concern was pretty clear.
What was the main thrust of it?
He basically wanted to know who inside the administration knew in advance that these tariffs were going to be paused.
Okay, the foreknowledge aspect.
And crucially, who might have used that inside information to, make a profit in the stock market.
That's the key part for potential insider trading.
He specifically talked about the, quote, opportunity for people in the White House and the administration to be inside of trading.
That's a pretty direct accusation, or at least highlighting the potential for it.
It's stark, yeah. It points right at the potential abuse of, privileged information.
Okay, so that's Schiff's reaction. Now, building on that concern, let's look at the media perspective, specifically from that YouTube channel, The Ring of Fire. How did they frame it?
Well, based on our sources, they were, let's say, quite forceful. They didn't really mince words.
What was their take?
The host essentially said the whole sequence smacks of insider trading. Just laid it out there.
So connecting the dots very directly.
Yeah. The timing of the tariffs, the market dropping, then that buy signal on social media, then the quick reversal making the market surge.
It all looked incredibly suspicious to them.
Clearly. They seemed convinced it pointed towards market manipulation. Maybe for personal gain or maybe to benefit, wealthy friends or associates.
And that great time to buy post right before the pause announcement.
That was a major red flag for them. Huge.
Yeah, I can see why laying out the timeline like that does make you pause.
Definitely.
But okay, it's also really important we look at how the Trump administration or people associated with it responded to these sorts of questions.
Right. Balance is key here.
So Maria Bartiromo over on Fox News, she interviewed Lee Zeldin. He was the EPA administrator then.
Right. Which, first off, seems a bit odd. The EPA head talking about trade policy and potential insider trader.
It is a little unusual, yeah. But he was the one commenting. What did Bartiromo ask him?
She asked him directly about Adam Schiff's, quote, new claim. Put it right to him.
And Zeldin's response.
Well, he started by saying President Trump has a very good team around him working on trade policy. Kind of a standard defense.
Okay. But what about this specific allegation?
This is where it gets interesting. He asserted that this whole situation is, and I'm quoting here, not something to investigate, something to encourage.
Encourage. Encourage potential insider trading. That sounds striking.
It is. What was his reasoning for that pretty unusual stance?
Yeah, how did he justify saying encourage?
His argument, at least as reported in the source materials, that Trump, based on recent experience.
Like seeing the market drop when tariffs went on before?
Exactly. He argued Trump simply understood how the market would likely react. He knew putting tariffs on would make it fall, and pausing them would make it rise again.
So the logic is he knew the cause and effect of his own actions on the market.
Pretty much. Like he was just playing the known reaction.
But does that justification hold up when you think about the potential for, well, personal profit from that knowledge? Is strategically using knowledge of your own upcoming policy change okay?
That's the absolute crux of it, isn't it? And Zeldin apparently doubled down. He said something like, President Trump should be working with his team. That's not something to investigate, something to encourage.
Wow.
And then, almost like an aside, we're talking about potential insider trading here, but
Yeah.
it really seemed like he was dismissing the whole concern.
Dismissing it by calling it something to be encouraged. That's quite a take.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Okay, so now let's swing back to the YouTube channel host. They obviously heard Zeldin's perspective. How did they respond to that?
Oh, they had a sharp rebuttal. Very sharp.
What were their main points against Zeldin's argument?
Well, first, they kind of questioned the whole premise of Trump having this very good team.
How so?
They brought up that whole bizarre story with Peter Navarro, the trade advisor, apparently inventing a fictitious expert, to quote in his book.
Right. Ron Vara, that whole thing.
Yeah. So the channel host used that to suggest maybe the trade team wasn't as top-notch or straightforward as Zeldin claimed.
Undermining the credibility of the team's input, maybe.
Perhaps. They also pointed out that, this wasn't happening in a vacuum. Other countries were actively trying to talk trade with the U.S.
Suggesting there were other factors and diplomatic channels potentially being ignored or bypassed?
Could be. But the core of their argument really went back to the definition of insider trading itself.
Okay, what was their main point there?
They just hammered home that if you use non-public information, and in this case, that's knowledge of your own upcoming policy decisions.
Decisions that will predictably move the market.
Exactly. If you use that knowledge to deliberately influence the market for financial gain, well, that is the essence of insider trading. Full stop.
So directly contradicting Zeldin.
Completely.
Yeah.
They argued strongly that this is absolutely not something to encourage, but something that demands a proper investigation.
Did they look at this specific event in isolation, or did they see a pattern?
That's another key point they made. They looked back, suggesting there was a pattern of market reactions following Trump's tariff announcements, going back to January 20th of that year.
Implying this wasn't just a one-off, maybe.
Right, that it fit into a broader sequence of events. And then they posed this really interesting hypothetical.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
They said, imagine you take this whole timeline, the tariff, the market drop, the buy tweet, the pause, the market jump.
All laid out clearly.
Yeah. And you present that along with Trump's own statements, like the Truth Social post and maybe that video hinting at intent.
Okay.
And you present all that to a jury in an actual insider trading case.
What did they think the outcome would be?
Their strong feeling, according to the source, was that a conviction would be pretty likely based just on that evidence presented.
Wow. That really frames it in stark legal terms.
It does. It makes you think about the complexities of applying these laws to someone who's literally making the policy that moves the market.
It's a unique situation, definitely, where the policymaker is the source of the non-public information, in a way.
Precisely. And the YouTube host didn't seem optimistic about any real investigation happening.
Why not?
They voiced a lot of frustration, particularly pointing to the Department of Justice at the time under Pam Bondi. There was a clear sense from their perspective that political realities would likely prevent any serious inquiry.
A feeling that it wouldn't be pursued regardless of the evidence.
That seemed to be their take, yeah. A sense of impunity.
Did the video transcript mention anything about the future? Any possibility of revisiting this?
It did touch on that. They speculated about, maybe future hearings if the political landscape changed significantly.
Like if Democrats gained control later on. They mentioned November 2026 specifically.
Yeah, something like that. But even then, they acknowledged a caveat.
Which was?
That even if hearings happen down the road, the actual power to, retroactively prosecute something like this might be pretty limited.
So a possibility of uncovering more information, perhaps, but maybe not leading to legal consequences after the fact.
That seemed to be the suggestion. So the overall feeling from the YouTube host was just deep frustration.
Yeah, sounds like it.
A feeling that something improper, potentially illegal happened.
Right out in the open, based on the timeline they laid out.
Exactly. And that ultimately there was nothing that could really be done about it.
Yeah.
They finished by saying that was the most infuriating part for them.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together for folks listening.
Yeah, let's summarize.
We've got this clear sequence. Tariffs on, market down, buy tweet, tariffs paused, market up.
A sequence that, on its face, definitely raises questions about potential market manipulation, potential insider trading.
And you have strong reactions. People like Adam Schiff, the host of The Ring of Fire, calling for investigations, pointing to what looks like profiting from non-public privileged information.
Right, seeing it as potentially illegal.
But then, on the other side, you have a cabinet member, Lee Zeldin, defending the actions. More than defending, actually saying they should be encouraged.
Based on the idea that Trump just understood the market effects of his own policies.
Which itself raises a whole host of ethical questions.
Absolutely. So we've laid out the timeline, the specific allegations from the sources, and these really quite varied responses. Lots to chew on.
The core tension really seems to be, can a policymaker use foreknowledge of their own decisions? Decisions they know will move markets, to signal buying opportunities or potentially benefit themselves or others.
And is that ethical?
Yeah.
Is it legal? And what does it mean when a high-ranking official seems to, well, endorse it?
Those are the big questions hanging over this whole situation.
So maybe the final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder, considering everything we've discussed today, that timeline, those statements, the arguments from Schiff, Zeldin, the YouTube channel.
All based on the sources we reviewed.
Right. What does this whole episode potentially tell us about market ethics, about the accountability of powerful people whose decisions can so directly and maybe predictably sway financial markets?
It's definitely a complex picture. As always in these deep dives, we're presenting the information and the different perspectives that are out there.
Yeah, this is just a snapshot, but hopefully a useful one. We really encourage you to think about these different viewpoints, maybe even check out the sources if you're curious, and form your own informed take.